So let's take a look at the armies of Warhammer 40k that seem to be struggling more by the numbers, and seem to be winning slightly fewer games for the average player. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're doing a top 10 of, in theory, the weakest armies of Warhammer 40k by the numbers. Though admittedly, compared with usual videos I've made like this, Warhammer 40k game balance really isn't too bad right now. For this one though, I thought we would take a look at the armies that seem to be towards the bottom of the pack in Warhammer 40k 10th edition currently, at least in terms of the amount of wins that the average player is getting when they're putting the army on the tabletop. For these videos, I generally like to talk through big tournament win percentage as the main way to go through them, going down in order of that, though as ever it's only part of the story and does have its limitations, so important to both talk about the context and also the power of different factions at the top tournament level as well, as armies can function really quite differently, perhaps either being strong or weak for the average player, though possibly completely reversed for the few people duking it out to win grand tournament places at the absolute pinnacle of 40k. Plenty of places collect data on these. For this one I'm largely using manually added up data from myself, going through best coast pairings and the wins and losses of armies at grand tournaments. I've also taken a look at several of the usual stats sites for some other insights. I quite like Goonhammer's win rates, as they're from more average players on their Tabletop Battles app, and there's plenty of other good stat sites out there that I'll link below. As mentioned though, 40k game balance really isn't in too bad a spot right now. The player's skill level and their army list construction are more important than the choice of faction, and so far after the latest balance pass that might be more true than it's ever been in Warhammer 40k. Something's always going to be lowest by win rates, but these are generally not really all that far behind the mid tier or even the top tier right now, and armies with low win rates can absolutely do great in the right hands and win grand tournaments still. There's some that feature here like Space Marines that seem to be notably good at that. Having said that though, I'd still say that win rate is the most important metric for the majority of players out there, as that reflects most people's experiences as opposed to the elite few, even if both aspects are important. Before we jump into the top 10 of these proper, worth mentioning the mid-tier of 40k armies, which is really quite big at the moment. With win rates around 51 to 50%, we've got the Demons, Genestealer Cult, Votan, Blood Angels, Death Guard and Dark Angels, and then a couple of armies that are only 1 percentage point away from featuring on the list, with Chaos Knights and Orcs. All of these in pretty solid spots though, winning about as many games as they lose, generally having the chance to do well in big tournaments, and again maybe another nod to 40k game balance being rather good right now. Into the top 10 though, and the first few armies are all on 48% win rate, which again, to have them featuring in this one, really means that faction balance is super tight right now, and these armies are only just fractionally behind the mid tier, and really not far behind the upper mid tier. In any case though, going through these, first up we have the Space Wolves, win rates of 48%, though it seems from Goonhammer's more casual dataset they are doing worse there, down at 44, and look, one of the lowest armies in the game on their list. That one does seem like one of the bigger discrepancies between the two. They don't seem to have been performing particularly stand out at a top level sort of play, with just the two placings where they either got tournament victories or went first 5 games undefeated, which is fairly low, and kind of low for the competitive play rate as well. In big tournaments they're played around 17th most out of the 28 factions. The last balance change did have some nerfs for them. Ayak Rockfist and Ragnar Blackmane both went up, as did Thunderwolves and bigger Bloodclaw units, so there were some staples hit there. And otherwise they had a small boost to Logan Grimnar's Deep Strike rule being freer, and then the Space Marine changes. The nerfs weren't huge but were pretty relevant to top armies though, hitting some commonly taken units. Fort's doing well for them. Most people are taking the Saga of the Beast Slayer for a nice easy core damage buff, plus a bunch of really quite powerful stratagems to support their units getting to melee and hitting hard when they're there. The Gladius and Stormlance from the core codex seem to be doing equally well, if not better for them though by the numbers, both also being detachments that support Space Wolf melee well. The majority of their unique units are pretty usable. Wolfguard Headtakers and Terminators tend to be staples. Wolfen with Shield and Hammers with a character in the Beast Slayer detachment are nice. Or characters beyond the Fell-Handed, Ragnar Blackmane and Logan Grimnar are all rather great. Ayak Rockfist still being played, though not quite as much as before it would seem after the points nerf. Thunderwolves are still very usable, though maybe not vying for single strongest unit in the codex anymore. And then beyond that, they tend to be backed up by a bunch of the Space Marine objective support things, infiltrators, intercessors, jump intercessors or scouts, plus often a bit of fire support. Overall they're still not really in that bad a place. They maybe did feel that the small nerfs were a touch unnecessary for them though. They felt like they were more sort of mid to upper mid before, and maybe seem to have dropped down to maybe slightly lower mid now, but it doesn't seem to have hurt them too much. For wishlist things for them, it might be nice if Grey Hunters were better, and out of their new characters, Njal Stormcaller is a rather underwhelming one. It'd be good to see an improvement to him as well. Before we move onwards and up the list, I'll just give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor in Tabletop Stronghold, makers of magnetic carry cases based in the USA. Magnetic storage is now the single most popular way to get Warhammer miniatures from A to B, attaching magnets to the bottom of your bases so they hold onto steel surfaces, so it means that you can have them all lined up in their carry case nice and safe without banging and rubbing on each other, or needing more bulky foam, so it means that you can fit in more units. Tabletop Stronghold's take on these are these mag cases, a box made of notably sturdy MDF that's really quite hard to damage or break when it's put together. And then in that box go some slide in and out steel trays, and you can raise and lower those depending on the height of the miniatures that you're transporting. Then on the front of the box there's an acrylic sheet to protect the miniatures, and handy that it's clear to be able to see what's where and display your handiwork. Broadly speaking, reviews and feedback I've seen of these have tended to be pretty positive on places like Reddit and down in the YouTube comments. I personally consider them pretty practical and easy to use. As well as their cases, they also have an MDF terrain set on sale. Might be of interest to some of you as it's a little cheaper if you do pick up one of their boxes. If you'd like to take a look over their stuff, there'll be links down in the video description, and I'll cycle back to a couple of their cases at the end of the video. A big thank you to them for sponsoring this one. Next up, let's take a look at the other armies, around 48% wins or so, and level with the Space Wolves and the others we have Index Drukhari. Like the Space Wolves, that's a small drop compared with pre-update, though the Drukhari don't exactly have that many players at the moment, seeming they're played about 25th out of the 28 factions. I feel like it might be a little bit of a lull before people jump in with the Codex, and they are one of the slightly lesser collected armies in Warhammer 40k in general. Interestingly, in casual games they're doing a fair bit better, with Goonhammer's win rates being more like 53%, and despite a rather middling win rate here, it looks like the small amount of people playing them have been doing rather well to place highly at tournaments, doing better than the majority of the other factions there, with 7 high placings at big events, and that's pretty notable for the small amount of people playing them. Mr. Scar is probably helping those statistics a bit, but there's certainly other people winning. For the last balance pass, they had Kronos get cheaper if you run 2 of them in a squad. Those things are weirdly tough for the points now, though it wasn't exactly a significant change for the faction. For detachments, they've generally been playing either Reaper's Wager or the Sky Splinter detachment, Reaper's Wager being a little bit more popular and successful, doing well to deliver Drukhari units into melee and helping them hit harder when they get there. Some armies taking along a few Harlequin allies, though they do well enough without. After several waves of balance passes, most of the units in the index were really quite usable. Plenty of good options for filling out the transports, and the other things solid enough besides. Everything's going to require a bit of a reinterpretation now the Codex points have just gone live though. Several units have been lost, but the rest have got a few new detachments to go at, and the interesting new mechanics with all those pain abilities, some of which are similar to before, some of which are very different. Will be fun to see what stands on top after the Codex comes out. The Cabalite detachment seems kind of fun in there. I look forward to covering a few army lists and maybe doing a tier list after people have had the chance to try them out on the tournament scene. Next up, and also on 48% wins, we have the Chaos Space Marines. Again, not really that low compared with the mid tier. It seems they're more or less the same as they were prior to the balance update. Otherwise, for their data points, they're around about mid play rate in Warhammer 40k currently, 15th out of the 28 factions. That is a bit on the low side relative to their play rates normally. They are a popular faction. Their more casual win rates from Goonhammer are lower than the competitive currently at 45%, and they've been kind of middling on the top event performance, with 5 lists at events going 5 games undefeated, though notably including the enormous London Grand Tournament, where Liam VSL's Veterans of the Long War took first place. The last balance changes also weren't particularly meaningful for them. Abaddon very slightly cheaper, Venom Crawlers down to 110. Fabius Bile had a small buff resurrecting at the end of a phase, though the Dark Commune got slightly pricier if you like your Cursed Cultists. For the detachments post-update, it seems that Creations of Bile is having a bit of a resurgence. It seems that one wasn't getting on particularly well into Death Guard and Night meta, but now that's gone away, they're back with a vengeance. It looks like it's at least a fairly even split of Renegade Raiders, Pat-bound Zealots, and Creations of Bile seeing solid play rates and reasonable success. Renegade Raiders with some extra AP and advance and shoot, plus some good stratagems. Pat-bound Zealots giving you some big damage and is often good for vehicle-centric armies. Veterans of the Long War is seeing a bit more play than it was previously, and that might be related to some good examples set at the London Grand Tournament. Again, really quite a lot of good stuff for them. They often have some core damage combos jumping out of Rhinos, with Chosen or Legionaries with Lords or Fabius Bile, perhaps backed up by some heavy fire support from something between Vindicators, Obliterators or Predators, and you can stat their damage really quite high with things like Abaddon or the Hellbrute, particularly useful in Pat-bound Zealots with all those 5+ Dark Pacts. The Lord Discordant is a bit of a powerhouse, charging forward into the enemy lines, and nicely fighty and very fast. For objective support, Cultists are pretty auto-include given sticky objectives. Some allied Nurglings can get you some cheap infiltrators, and Bikers and Raptors are efficient skirmishers. Possessed and Warped Talons can also be quite nice for sort of middle tier threats jumping into the mid board. A lot of lists also take Cypher along as a particularly scary lone operative with a lot of damage threat. Overall, despite win rates being a little bit lower mid tier, the Chaos Space Marines still generally seem like they're in a strong spot with lots of viable unit options. Clearly able to win big events, taking down the single biggest tournament around. I'd say for criticisms for them, maybe the single main one is that half of the detachments could use some serious rules buffs, perhaps things like the Fellhammer Siege Host or the Deceptors or similar. They feel like they're particularly important ones to get right, given they represent the playstyle of Legions. Next up, and also on 48% wins, we have the Space Marines, having risen up a fair bit from prior to the balance update. It seems that the average player in more casual games is a little lower, with Goonhammer's win rates having them down at 46%. However, it does look like people are pretty optimistic about getting good results for them on the tournament scene. They're the most played faction in competitive games right now, just slightly nosing ahead of World Eaters. And in terms of my count of high placings at events, going 5 games undefeated for the first 5, they seem to be second highest there, in similar sort of leagues to Admech and Eldari, though a bit less standout given just how many people are playing them. The last balance update didn't necessarily add directly to the strength of their top builds too much. There were nerfs to Guilliman, big squads of Blade Guard, and the Ballistas Dreadnought. Though on top of already successful Ultramarines builds, they gained the Shadowmark Talon for the Raven Guard with Ethon Shan, which looks like it might be the single best performing Space Marine detachment when taken individually, though it has kind of low player numbers given not too many people have that specific army to run. Otherwise, for the rest, the Gladius is the most used. Vanguard, Ironstorm and Stormlance also can do pretty well, Stormlance being one of the other more popular and successful ones on the competitive scene. Shadowmark is a boosted version of Vanguard, with Centurions and Inceptors warping on and off the board, plus a few other really nice stratagems, and Gladius is just great general purpose support, very nice for delivering Space Marines into melee and hitting hard there, and have some good stuff to support shooting as well. For standout units, Ultramarines lists are building around Guilliman or Calgar or both, still good value there, and there's plenty of other options, and the Space Marines have got lots of small unit support things with Scouts for infiltrating, Infiltrators for screening deep strike, Intercessors for sticky objectives, Incursors to buff shooting while also doing skirmish things, and Jump Intercessors that can move fast, fight fairly hard, deep strike, and do secondaries. Between all that, that's quite a lot of useful things for winning the mission, and they often tend to get backed up by some heavy firepower, certain tanks and dreadnoughts which enjoy boosted oath of moment, the Redemptors seeing a bit more play again on that front with a lower points cost. The Combi Weapon Lieutenant from Leviathan is a common staple to be able to skirmish with the enemy and reactive move away, and then the actual core damage combos for each list might depend varying on the detachment and chapter. Ultramarines have Guilliman and Calgar for a couple of them. Shadowmark Talon is likely to be Devastator Centurions, Inceptors, and often 2 units of 10 Vanguard veterans, one with Strike with a lone operative, and one with a jump captain to rapid ingress turn 1 and get a guaranteed charge on the enemy. Overall, it seems like at a high level Space Marines are doing rather well, but maybe doing a bit more middling for the average player. This often seems to be the way with them, with the average Space Marine list not being quite as strong as an optimised one, at least partly due to the different chapters that you can play, and their absolutely enormous model range where most players won't have most units. It is nice to see some extra viable builds though, with both Raven Guard and Ultramarines doing well and being strong. I guess we now have some Iron Hands and White Scars to add into the mix. Will be fun to see how much impact they have. They might just about be nosy into this list, though it still looks like you can do very well with them. Though certain Ultramarines lists and the Raven Guard Shadowmark Talon are likely to be significantly more powerful than a typical collection for an average player for another chapter. Next up, and moving 1 pip of win percentage below the previous 4, and we have the Imperial Knights. They're on win rates of 47%, which compared with the average for the previous meta is dropping at an enormous 10% down from being one of the very strongest factions in the game after their points nerfs and their codex updates. In more casual play, Goonhammer has their win rates of around 46%. It does feel kind of notable that the nightly win rates are quite this low. In general, in the stats, they've often been an army that's had good win rates at both competitive and casual levels, but then generally not quite so much performance at the top levels of play, just due to their nature as a bit of a stat check army, reliant on big tough profiles and lots of damage and defense to succeed, but maybe not so many subtleties in the way that they can play and gain some clever advantages. It looks like their new codex is on the lower mid side by most metrics really. They haven't been doing particularly well at top tournament placings as per the usual. Just 3 of those here, and one of those was pre-codex. There's plenty of enthusiasm for people trying out the new detachments, being the 11th most played army out of the 28 factions, but they're a far cry from being one of the very most played as they were when they were overpowered. As basically mentioned already though, they've had really quite a lot of nerfs since then. First they had some big points increases for the big knights, Then they got their new codex with extra detachments, but there were some nerfs in there. The detachments were generally trade-offs versus the index rather than upgrades, and they don't have their feel no pain anymore. And then when people were stressing about Nightly Rush with the Valorstrike lands, Games Workshop dropped some day one nerfs for that, stopping those weirdly powerful stratagems being anywhere near as efficient. After those nerfs and changes, it looks like for early days the Questoris Companions seems to be emerging as the one that's the strongest attachment for them. They've got several powerful stratagems, such as a +1 to hit and wound against monsters and vehicles, and advance and charge for a big knight, which is a rather big deal. And the detachment rule is usable, and there's a few good enhancements as well. Otherwise, some are using the Valorstrike Lance and the Spearhead at Arms, both of which are seeing play. Those seem to be less successful, at least so far, but both have had some fairly high placings as well. For standout units, I did do a nightly tier list as the last video on the channel. Feel free to check that one out, but perhaps for the bigger knights, the Knight Lancer, the Atropos and Canis Rex feel like they're perhaps a slight cut above the rest, all pretty powerful and dangerous in their own ways. Usually at least some armature support is needed, though it generally tends to be a little bit more on the limited side after the codex updates. Obviously that depends on whether or not you're playing Spearhead at Arms though. Beyond that, the majority of the codex are more put in sort of solidly playable but not crazy standout sort of category. Besides the ones already mentioned, the Helverin, Castellan and Crusader might be slightly more popular, or knights with good bondsman abilities like the Defender or the Castigator in Spearhead at Arms. Then there's usually a little support with allied agents. A Calidus assassin is rarely a bad idea to bounce around the board doing secondary objectives, or you could have support from Sisters and Immolators or some others. Overall though, post-codex, the knights have come down from their power trip in quite a big way, perhaps swinging from overpowered to slightly underpowered. Obviously still winning a lot of games, but they generally tend to do that otherwise, and having sort of mid to lower mid win rates at a casual level seems to be a really bad sign for them. Usually they tend to be a little bit on the dominant side there, big stat lines and shooty profiles and being easy to use generally helping them out. I feel like it's at least partly due to knights being not quite so hard to kill post-codex, having the feel no pain go away, and with popular detachments not having quite as much defensive buffs. Next up, and also on 47% wins, we have the Tyranids. They're more or less where they were pre-update, though it does look like more casual win rates are doing a bit better for them, with 51% there. They are being played really quite a lot, 7th out of the 28 factions, and they've had 5 placings where the player has gone 5 games undefeated with them, which isn't too bad on that front, but becomes a bit underwhelming if you weight it by the amount of people playing them. Last balance update, they had some subtle changes, some points cuts to the Neurolictor, Turvigon, Morlock, and 10 strong Genestealer squads. Maybe the Neurolictor and the bigger Genestealer squads being the most impactful there. And since the update looks like the invasion fleet has maybe caught up a little bit with the subterranean assault in terms of outright performance, both of those seem to be popular and doing fairly well right now. Invasion fleet with its easy to use damage buffs and feel no pain, subterranean assault delivering Tyranids into close range, and having some nice shenanigans with reserves. Plenty more detachments are playable enough though, with Vanguard Onslaught, Crusher Stampede and Assimilation Swarm doing well enough. For stronger Tyranid staples, generally you need some big bugs to deal with tough stuff. Exocrines and Tyrannifexes are often staples there, maybe non-emissaries or Maleceptors doing good work too. Or for some heavy hitting anti-tank fire, a bunch of Zoanthropes supported by a Neurotyrant for an overall very shooty unit with big guns never tire. For support, a single Biovoice basically auto-includes to spawn some spore mines around the map for board control and secondaries. The Lictor variants are all pretty excellent, from Death Leaper to the Neurolictor, and particularly the cheap regular one. There's often the Hive Tyrant or the Swarm Lords to help out with the command point economy. Likely some Multitudes for some OC to sweep onto objectives, and the Raveners are a particularly standout unit as well, with their burrowing on and off the board and having some quite general purpose melee. Brood Lords and Genestealers are quite nice too. Then depending on detachment, there might be some units that are keyworded to that. Tunnelers and melee units in Subterranean Assault in particular. The Trigon Prime is nice there as well, as is the Haruspex. And then Vanguard Onslaught and the Assimilation Swarm have their keyworded units that they're going to be building around. Overall, despite a shaky start and not really getting that much of a buff last time around, they do seem to have risen up a little in performance status. I feel like having Knights being less oppressive isn't the worst for them, as they often have some problems with toughness 11 and 12 things, with only limited data sheets like the Tyrannifex and maybe Zoanthropes to punch into them quite hard. Overall, they still seem to be a bit on the lower mid side in Warhammer 40k, though clearly not so far behind that they can't win lots of games. Next up we have the Thousand Sons, who certainly had to be in the running for one of the factions where people were most apprehensive about them being any good after the update. Games Workshop did hit them with quite a lot of nerfs, though admittedly they were in a position where they were one of the strongest factions in the game prior to that. It seems now they have wins of around 47%, dropping down about 7% from that. That seems to be consistent with casual games from Goonhammer. though it does look like sentiment to put them on the table in competitive games has taken an understandable hit. They're the 24th most played faction now, so really quite low there, and perhaps between being a bit weaker than normal and not so many people playing them, they've only had the one top placing at events that I found, and I believe that was the big Scarab Occult Terminator spam list at the London Grand Tournament. The last balance update did have a lot of bad news for them. Just about every single staple unit went up a little bit in points cost, though it did have a few swings the other way. Bigger Scarab Occult Terminator squads getting cheaper, and the Terminator Sorcerer rule getting changed, and also the Sekitar robots going down in cost as well. Kabbalistic Rituals getting only one attempt was a nerf as well, fairly directly making the faction rule less efficient. For detachments, it's still the Grand Covenant that's most played, with good magical support with their damage rules from the core rule, plus some nice stratagems including the Ritual reroll and several that help out Magnus specifically. It looks like since the update more people have been choosing to play the Rubrique Phalanx, and that does seem to have caught up with the Grand Covenant a little bit in terms of overall performance and win rates. Maybe the relative nerfs to a lot of Grand Covenant's units and the buffs to Scarab Occult Terminators helping out there. It does seem that they're genuinely more played now. Otherwise though, for strong units in Grand Coven, Magnus is still generally at the helm of it. Much of the army often tends to be Rubric Marine squads supported by Sorcerers or Infernal Masters, maybe jumping out of Rhinos to buff their psychic damage, and then small units of Zangors, Enlightened, Sekitars or Spawn to screen and skirmish. For some heavy lifting, Mutiliths are still used, though maybe a little bit less than previously, and the Thousand Suns Predator Annihilator is okay for anti-tank. Overall, at least by the tournament performance numbers, despite lots less enthusiasm to play the faction, the people choosing to still don't seem to be doing too badly, even if they seem to be behind the power curve for 40k now. It does maybe seem that Games Workshop just slightly overcorrected with these guys, and perhaps a few more points cuts in the other direction wouldn't be the worst idea in the world. It doesn't seem like they've been knocked down to lower 40% win rates though. Next up, and in third from bottom, we have the Emperor's Children at the moment. It seems their win rates are around 46%, so very slightly down compared with pre-update, and things look fairly similar for the casual games. They are still putting in some top performances, 3 players going first 5 games undefeated. That seems like it's a sort of middling amount when weighted for their win rate, being played 20th out of 28 factions of 40k. Last balance update had a buff to the Flawless Blade melee getting an extra attack, which was nice to see. And Fulgrim dropping down in points once again, going down 20 and also getting some move through terrain rules. There was a slight counter swing though with an unexpected nerf to the Lord Cacophonist. For detachment choices, it still looks like it's the Coterie of the Conceited doing the work here. Easy access to some early damage buffs that can build throughout the game, plus a few helpful support stratagems. At least as of yet, it doesn't look like the Flawless Blade buff has done enough to bump Flawless Bladesmen into performing particularly well yet. The Emperor's Children don't exactly have a huge roster, and plenty of their lists tend to be at least fairly cookie cutter as a result. Multiple squads of Lord Exaltants with Infractors, a couple of squads of Tormentors, hopefully one for the home objective and then one to infiltrate into the midfield, Wings Demon Princes or maybe Mauler Fiends to rush up the board, Norse Marines and Rhinos, and perhaps a few Spawn Flawless Blades, maybe Lucius the Eternal or a Lord Cacophonist. It seems a few people have used Fulgrim since the points cuts, though he's still not exactly a staple on lists. I feel like for criticisms for the Emperor's Children, if they wanted to add a bit of strength, it would be quite nice to see Fulgrim be a genuinely usable and scary option. He still feels like he's not quite where he needs to be, though otherwise a few small points cuts to some of their staples might not be the worst in the world to propel them a little bit more into the centre of power levels. Next up, and seemingly to have the lowest win rates out of the main factions that Games Workshop actually supports, we've got the Astra Militarum. They seem to have win rates of 45% here, which seems to be consistent both with competitive and casual play. Slightly middling play rates at 12th out of the 28 40k factions, which is a bit low for them. They are a particularly widely collected army, and the number of high placings, with going 5 games undefeated, again is really quite low for Guard typically. Only 3 players managing that, which is kind of low for the amount of people playing them. Though notably one of them was the list that won the Las Vegas Open with the Recon Horde list. Overall though, their numbers just aren't particularly convincing on any of these levels. The last balance change had some nerfs and buffs. There were nerfs to both the Dawn datasheets, but then buffs to the already good Gaunt's Ghosts, the smaller squad of Combat Engineers, Bold Solar Leontus and the Baneblade variants. Detachments wise, the Combined Arms Regiment is the most played and is solidly successful, giving you some nice lethal hits on your shooting, Fields of Fire and reinforcements. The tank-focused Hammer of the Emperor being the next most played. By current numbers, it seems like it's doing rather well on the casual scene, but worse in competitive, which I feel like checks out with the theory being a big stat check army. As mentioned, Recon often puts in appearances on the top tables for just a few good players, though win rates particularly casually aren't very good there, and requires playing intelligently with some vast horde lists. For standout units, a lot of ranged fire support is done well with Rogal Dawn commanders and several of the Rust variant data sheets, plus maybe a Hellhound to light the way by stripping some cover. Kazakin are very nice in transports, both in Combined Arms and Hammer of the Emperor. Borglin and Rough Riders can do a bit of counter-charging. Krieg infantry blocks are okay to move up to the midboard. For skirmish and screening units, the Scout Sentinels and the Katachan Jungle Fighters are handy to have, and often hiding out in the backfield there might be a big command block, some Cadian shock troops with a command squad to sticky the home objective, and then maybe broadcast the orders of Castellan Creed or Lord Solar. It does seem a few more people are taking Lord Solar Leontis again after the points cut. Finally, Gaunt's Ghosts are in very near auto-include status, being that cheap for a jump on and off the board units that can do some other fun stuff too, makes them an all-around strong pick. Overall though, at least at the moment, it does seem like for the average player they're just lacking a little bit of overall strength. I guess the Dawn nerfs didn't really help on that front, given that the commanders tend to be staples in most lists. Otherwise, I suppose a few of the other lower performing armies of 40k got some more meaningful buffs. Having said all that, they're still not doing too badly, still capable of winning one of the biggest and best Warhammer 40k tournaments around, and it's really quite impressive to see an army second from bottom here, still with a 45% win rate at big events. It's really still not all that far behind 50-50, and I feel like that's genuinely impressive for a game with 28 factions. As ever though, there is the one faction that Games Workshop doesn't really seem to want to balance, and that's Imperial Agents. The Grand Tournament wins are around 44%, though it's a bit meaningless given that almost no one's playing them. Maybe the casual game data is a bit better there as there's more of it, and they're down at 38% win rates there. As per normal, no big event performance, and easily the least played army in the game, far below Deathwatch. For the balance changes, they have the Deathwatch veterans and the Watchmaster points buff, plus a very small change to Inquisitor attachment. The Watchmaster and Deathwatch dropping helped out a little bit, but was never exactly going to be likely to turn the faction around. When people are brave enough to put them on the tabletop, they generally use Imperialis fleets, getting a few focal damage buffs and a few useful movement shenanigans, particularly playing around with their Voidfarers, and beyond that they have quite a lot of skirmish infantry. The Deathwatch veterans, maybe led by Watchmasters, are probably going to be the way to go if you want to deal damage, but then you can have some Navy Breachers deep striking if you'd like to, maybe maximal sub-doctor squads for some really quite tanky chaff with their invulnerable saves, and the assassins are quite nice here, being able to swap out between the different variants of them. As ever with them, they're not really going to be good unless Games Workshop decides to try and help them out in a major way, and in over a year it doesn't look like they've got any inclination to. The most obvious thing to help them out would be some sort of core rules boost, giving them an actual faction special rule, maybe something that could help out against tanks or monsters in particular, could be a good way to kill two birds with one stone. Overall though, they've had no real significant balance changes and seem to be treated as allies plus a bit more of a fun and fluff faction, though Games Workshop didn't explicitly call them so when they sold the codex, and as ever must be quite frustrating for people who want to play them in a bigger way, as it wouldn't really be too hard to help them out in quite a major way. With Imperial Agents taking up their customary spot as the worst performing army in the game though, that just about brings us to the end of this one, though I feel like for a top 10 weakest video in Warhammer 40k, this one feels about as positive as it's ever been. There definitely are some factions with issues, and hopefully they'll get some improvements, but the vast majority of armies out there are winning something approximate to 50% of their games, and the vast majority of them can also perform at the highest level, 2 of these 10 winning the Las Vegas Open and the London Grand Tournament. Let me know your thoughts on the armies though. How have you been finding to play them in game? And if you'd like to see improvements for the faction, what would you like to see, if anything? That's about it for this one, though before I go I'll just cycle back to Tabletop Stronghold, the video sponsor, and talk through their range of magnetic carry cases. As mentioned, their cases are MDF boxes, and inside those boxes go these steel trays. Here's how many miniatures you can fit on each tray when it's fully loaded, around about 90 odd 25mm bases, or around 30 Terminator size ones. For their offerings, they've then got cases of different sizes and heights. The Mag Case Mini is £72 or $75 with the AT25 code in the video description. That includes postage, though there might be some VAT or import duties to pay depending on where you are around the world. The Mini one still has plenty of room in it though. You can see there's plenty of room for Terminators and some great big tanks on the bottom story here. Here's their more standard offering with the regular mag case. This one's much taller, as you can see by the Chaos Knight on the ground floor, £114 or $120, and each of these comes with a supply of magnets as well to mount to the miniature's bases. Then there's the really big one, basically 2 of the previous attached together. There's some different options for how many of these steel trays that you want, if you want more or fewer. This one should be big enough for plenty of entire collections out there. Finally, they do also have their MDF terrain as well. That one can be bought as an add-on to the other cases, and you get a discount if you happen to do so and pick it all up at the same time. Might be of interest for people who are in the market for that already. In any case though, check them out, links down in the video description. Use that AT25 code if you do buy anything from them, as it saves plenty of money, and a big thank you to them for sponsoring this one. In any case though, I'll leave that there for now. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I will keep the regular 40k videos coming just about every day. And if you have been watching the videos on the channel regularly and you'd like to help support and keep them coming, check out the channel's Patreon page, links down in the video description. Channel patrons get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link's down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.